Welcome Trinidad and Tobago to our News 4 report, a product of the Government Information Services Limited and the Ministry of Communications. I am Kimberly Ram-Calawan, sitting in for Nicola Bartu. Let's take a look at the headlines. Reverend Joy Evelyn Abdul Mohan is sworn in as a new independent senator, replacing former independent senator Subhash Ram-Kilalawan. The Upper House pays tribute to the late Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson. And the Energy and Energy Affairs Minister gives reassurance that TNT's oil and gas sector will remain relevant in 2025. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Tribute was paid to former President and Prime Minister Arthur N.R. Robinson in Tuesday's Senate sitting. Opening the tribute's Minister of Planning and Sustainable Development, Dr. the Honorable Bhuendra Tiwari, says former President Robinson has left a legacy in Trinidad and Tobago politics.
A moment of silence by the nation's highest decision-making body for a man many insist is one of the greatest statesmen this country has ever seen.
I now invite senators to stand for 1 minute's silence in honor of Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson.
Former President A.N.R. Robinson is being remembered as a great man with a great legacy as tributes continue to pour in following his death on April 9th. Opening the tributes in Tuesday's Senate sitting, Planning Minister Dr. Tiwari says Mr. Robinson has left numerous legacies, including the battle for Tobago's autonomy and fair treatment as half of a twin island state, and his belief in empowering the electorate. He adds there is one legacy, however, that eclipses all others, one which he says Mr. Robinson was willing to risk his life for.
The third legacy of vital significance is his answer to the question of what should a leader do when democracy in his country is at risk. Mr. Robinson chose to put his life at risk rather than make it easy for democracy to be sacrificed. In doing so, he made it possible for the terrorists at the time not to contemplate their own risk as they proceeded with their acts of outrage. Fundamentally, what Attack with Full Force did was take the power and control out of the hands of the hostage takers. That is why, out of anger and frustration, they shot him in his leg.
Dr. Tiwari highlights Mr. Robinson's contribution to not only the development of Trinidad and Tobago, but his contribution to the world.
The conceptualization of, facilitation of, and advocacy for the establishment of the International Criminal Court, despite opposition from very powerful countries in the early days of advocacy. Today, as the International Criminal Court brings abuse of power cases to justice, Mr. Robinson's contribution to the international justice system can be seen as a remarkable and formidable achievement.
Funeral arrangements for former President Robinson will see his body lie in state at the current seat of Parliament, located at the International Waterfront Centre on Ryson Road in Port of Spain on Tuesday 29th and Wednesday 30th April 2014 between the hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Also, a state ecumenical service will be held in his honor at the National Academy for the Performing Arts, or NAPA, in Port of Spain. This service will begin at 9:30 a.m. on Thursday, May 1st, 2014. Following the state service, the body of the late Arthur N.R. Robinson will lie in state in the eastern lobby of the NAPA until 3 p.m. Arrangements to honor his life in the sister isle of Tobago are still being finalized. Gregory McBurney, News 4.
Staying with the news related to the Senate, 49-year-old Reverend Joy Evelyn Abdul Mohan has been newly appointed as an independent senator to fill the vacancy left by former independent senator Subhash Ram-Kilalawan, who resigned last week. A clergy of the Presbyterian Church, Reverend Joy Evelyn Abdul Mohan has been appointed by His Excellency Anthony Carmona, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The 49-year-old Reverend was sworn in during Tuesday's Senate sitting. Reverend Abdul Mohan received her undergraduate degree in theology at the St. Andrew's Theological College in Trinidad in 1987. She was the first local woman to graduate from the program. Reverend Abdul Mohan was ordained as a minister of words and sacrament of the Presbyterian Church in Trinidad and Tobago in 1989, and in 1993 she received her Master's of Arts degree from Princeton Theological Seminary in the United States. Reverend Abdul Mohan held high positions in several institutions, including Principal of St. Andrew's Theological College. She is originally from Princestown. In other news, Trinidad and Tobago's oil and gas sector will remain very much established in the year 2025. The assurance was given by Energy and Energy Affairs Minister, Senator the Honorable Kevin Ramnarine, during the Energy Lecture Series hosted by the Arthur Lockjack Business Graduate School. Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarine is forecasting a hopeful outlook for Trinidad and Tobago's future in the global oil and gas market. This comes as mounting concerns arise in the midst of the United States shifting its focus from importing crude oil to the development of their domestic shale oil and gas. During the Energy Lecture Series hosted by the Arthur Lockjack Business Graduate School, the minister shed light into its strategic plans government intends to undertake if it is to remain a dominant and key player in the marketing of this precious commodity. To the minister, this includes government taking a stronger role in marketing of its products, in light of new players, Mexico and Colombia, coming on stream in this part of the hemisphere.
Under previous versions of production sharing contracts, the companies were given, that's the contractor was given primary responsibility for developing markets for available natural gas and negotiating on a joint dedicated basis for the sale of that natural gas. That is no longer the case. The new production sharing contracts that we've signed over the last 3 years now gives the minister, and by minister we really mean the ministry, a greater range of options. So what does that mean? It means that the minister or the ministry could now get into the business of directly marketing oil or natural gas. And we think that's the way the country has to go. The government has to get more involved in the marketing of oil and natural gas.
Within the last 4 years, government has signed 12 production sharing contracts with international oil and gas giants BHP Billiton and BP, accounting for nearly half of the total 28 contracts this country holds. Minister Ramnarine notes that critical to sustaining this growth comes with shifting policies that will lead to attracting long-term investments.
Investment tax credits have been provided for enhanced oil recovery. There's been the allowance for sub-licensing in marine areas. We've introduced a special SPT rate for new field development. We've introduced incentives for deep horizon drilling on land and in marine area. And the big one, which was passed in Parliament, I think it was last week, Tuesday, is the restructuring of the capital allowances for exploration, development, workovers, and compression projects. And that simply means that we have put in place a mechanism now for companies operating under exploration and production licenses to recover their capital expenditure faster.
However, Minister Ramnarine allayed any fears that despite the U.S. restrictions on exporting LNG with the emergence of its shale gas, Trinidad and Tobago's markets are expands outside this once dominant territory in the U.S. that only accounts for 10.56% of our exports. He notes that this is possible as demand in the East and Europe remains and continue to grow.
What is the future of our humble 15.3 million tons per annum in Point Fortin? Well, I want to postulate that once we can supply or continue to supply it with reasonably priced natural gas, it will continue to exist. I believe the multinationals are of the same view. In 2013, Shell acquired Repsol's shares in Atlantic for the lion's share of the over $6 billion is spent on Repsol's assets. Why would Shell spend that kind of money if the LNG business in Trinidad and Tobago would be wiped out by American LNG exports? Shell obviously knows something. The other partners in Atlantic have signaled an interest to commence talks around a new Train 1 contract which expires in 2018.
While focus on the upstream sector is still necessary, the Energy Minister says a future in being energy efficient lies in capitalizing on the downstream aspect of production.
By 2025, we expect that a number of investments would have been made to upgrade existing plants at Point Lisas towards making them more efficient. In some cases, such as Tringen and PCS, that has already started, and we commend those companies for that investment. Efficiency speaks to a metric, MMBTU per ton. That's the unit of energy used to produce 1 ton of ammonia or methanol. The older plants at the Point Lisas industrial estate are less efficient than the newer plants. The level of efficiency at Point Lisas ranges from 50.5 MMBTU per ton for the older plants to 33.4 MMBTU per ton for the newer plants. So that is a huge gap in terms of energy efficiency.
More news after the break. Stay with us. The Arthur Lockjack Graduate Business School hosted the Business Association of Latin Studies BALAS annual conference. Panelists included Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Dukran, who highlighted the issues associated with small economies applied to the possibility of Caribbean integration. Caribbean integration must take into consideration a number of factors, including the issue of national debt and economies of individual nations, before that takes shape. This was a primary focus of the panel discussion titled Government Panel, Development Models, Small Economies, Big Challenges, as the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business, in collaboration with the University of the West Indies, hosted the Business Association of Latin Studies BALAS annual conference. Minister of Foreign Affairs Winston Dukran shared his views on the way forward as a region during one of the plenary sessions.
There is something that is not working between the asset base of the financial sector and the fiscal deficits of the countries in the CARICOM region. We need, therefore, to address that issue in a more holistic way, to have some relationship between our fiscal deficits on the public account and a ratio between assets and loans. In other words, banks are very profitable in the region. Not that we are against that, but what we are saying that we cannot have that where there is a surplus of liquidity on one hand and a deficit of cash on the other hand. That has to be fixed. So I raise those two issues for strategy in the context of integration without borders as the way forward.
Panelists sought to answer two major questions in the discussion, including how small economies ought to position themselves to access new markets and promote growth and development, as well as the development of effective small economies that will lead to participation at a global economic stage. International Relations lecturer at UWI Dr. Keith Nurse called for the Caribbean region to look at the power the diaspora held outside of the region.
So the level of integration that is facilitated through diasporas is one of the strategic assets that the Caribbean has that is being invested in. Again, it comes back to the issue of strategy. And last but not least, I would argue that for some of the areas that I mentioned earlier, in the areas of energy, food, and health, there's tremendous opportunities for Caribbean countries to work together. And why is this the case? When you talk to the bankers, again, back to the bankers, for them, it's the same cost to do a $10 million project as to do a $100 million project. And so they're far more interested in a $100 million project. So most of the energy projects in the Caribbean are $10 million projects. However, if we could, lump them together, create some critical mass, give it to the bankers, then it makes it easier for them to see how these investments can reap some rewards and a significant return on investment.
However, it was Chief Justice Ivor Archie who added to the school of thought that there was need for integration to be looked at from a constitutional perspective and the impact it will have on individualistic national laws.
We're having to take a fundamental look at our constitutional and legislative architecture. Even in the national sense, our constitutions have tended to be compromises of ways of balancing power between various interest groups, as opposed to taking a conscious decision or making an attempt to arrive at some consensus as to where we want to be, what kind of social and economic development model we want to create for our people, and developing that as the base and as the interpretative lens through which we would create and apply our laws.
The University of the West Indies Department of Behavioral Sciences hosted the Caribbean Court of Justice and Regional Integration Forum, where all judges of the Caribbean Court of Justice were in attendance. This event took place at the Teaching and Learning Center, UWI St. Augustine.
Speakers include the following distinguished judges of the Caribbean Court of Justice: the Right Honorable Sir Dennis Byron, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice; the Honorable Mr. Justice David Hayton; the Honorable Mr. Justice Jacob Witt; and the Honorable Mr. Justice Adrian Saunders. The topic of regional integration is not new to UWI and is part of a distinguished open lecture series of which several CARICOM leaders have been invited to the campus.
The CCJ is really two courts in one. That is to say, the court has two broad jurisdictions, two spheres of operation. One sphere is called the original jurisdiction of the court. It's called the original jurisdiction because litigants who approach the court there, they approach the court without having first gone to any other court.
The seminar was mounted as part of the curriculum for the course of International Relations of the Caribbean, which contains a module on regional integration, as well as the course on international law, treating with the topic, the peaceful settlement of disputes in international law, with emphasis on adjudication and the role of international court.
If Jamaica comes along or Grenada comes along and says, look here, we want you to suspend the need for us to impose 25% tax on foreign cement so it can come in, and they've got to produce some sort of case. Here we made it very clear that the COTED and the Secretary General couldn't do whatever they felt like. They had to act, obviously, in a proper, responsible manner. There was judicial review available. Just like many of you may know, activities of public bodies in any country are liable to be judicially reviewed to ensure that the process by which a body has come to a decision is a proper process and they've not acted irrationally, disproportionately, without hearing all parties and so on.
Therefore, there can hardly be a better place than UWI to have such conversations, given the long and prominent role of the university in regional integration. The intellectual foundation for this modern movement emanated from this institution by contribution of thoughts, views and time and energy towards furthering the integration process.
In the last 2 weeks, we have traced the history and evolution of Caribbean integration. After grappling with the quest for theory, we navigated through Federation, CARIFTA, CARICOM, the CSME, the OECS, and touched on the CCJ. Touched because today we are going to continue that discourse of the CCJ, on which, as you know, there's a compulsory question for your final exams at the end of this semester.
In the course of the lectures, the University of the West Indies have noted that Caribbean integration now speaks to more than trade, which was the focus on the early attempt of the Caribbean Free Trade Association, CARIFTA. They have also noted it has now extended to issues such as security, sports, the environment, a monetary union, and the free movement of goods, capital, and persons, among others.
In some specific areas of social policy, such as health, planning, education standards, border security, disaster preparedness, cooperative materials procurement, there have been encouraging attempts to benefit from combined group action. The other more pessimistic, some may say realistic view, insists that the regional economic integration process, which is progressing through the Caribbean single market and economy, the exercise appears to have been stalled. This perspective argues that the loss of momentum appears to have occurred because of indecisiveness, hesitation, and even reluctance on the part of some territorial leaders towards advancing the next crucial phases of integration.
Other distinguished CCJ judges in attendance included the Honorable Justice Mr. Winston Anderson and the Honorable Justice Mr. Rolston Nelson. The session was chaired and monitored by the Honorable Madam Justice Desiree Bernard, former judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Sports is on the other side of the break. Stay with us. The New York Police Department is one of the famed law enforcement agencies with a reputation of being tough and thorough when undertaking the task of solving and preventing crime. News 4 Sports recently got the opportunity to see the lighter side of the NYPD as they tackled our own Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in a friendly football encounter. Wayne Cunningham has more.
Former national goalkeeper Kerwin Inglis, defender Ralph Arab Nelson, and midfielder Sean David were part of a Trinidad and Tobago Police Service representative team which faced off against their counterpart from the New York Police Department in a friendly football encounter at the St. James Barracks. The younger, fitter NYPD squad got the scoring going with a well-worked item midway through the first period. It did not take the locals long to restore parity as the header was buried after the fine centre. In the second period, an errant backpass from another former national player, Peter Lewis, was punished to put the NYPD 2-1 up. It was 3-1 5 minutes after that as the Americans turned up the pressure. The local lawmen did not take kindly to that and answered with the goal of the match. But once again, the visitors stepped up their game to restore the 2-goal cushion. The TTPS scored, but there was no way back for them by the time former FIFA referee Jeffrey Hospitalis blew his whistle. The score was 4-3. NYPD. Wayne Cunningham, News 4 Sports.
More news when we return. Stay with us. Caring for the elderly in our society requires putting in place the needed legislation that will ensure the best geriatric care at old age homes and centers at all times. This was a focus during a 2-day symposium held by the Ministry of the People and Social Development's Division of Aging on creating a national policy on aging for Trinidad and Tobago. They were the youth of yesterday and the ones who paved the way for our society today. And while they are now considered members of the aged population with special needs and care, implementing the right policies that will ensure they receive the best geriatric attention is the focus of the national policy on aging. Much like our developed counterparts around the world, Trinidad and Tobago is gradually witnessing demographic changes with an aging population due to the decrease in births, infectious diseases affecting families, mixed with poor healthcare habits. The Ministry of the People and Social Development's Division of Aging held its symposium with the regulatory framework for Homes for Older Persons legislation. In opening the workshop, Dr. Jennifer Rouse, Director of the Division of Aging, highlighted lifestyle changes over the years as one of the reasons we are challenged as a society in caring for aged.
When you see the demographic, it's showing us that for the first time in the world we are seeing so many single elderly women living alone through never having been married or divorced or widowed. It means that we have to be visionaries and know that we have to ensure that not that they are only structures put down in user-friendly communities where they can keep their independence, but in communal settings, that it must be monitored, regulated, and controlled. Otherwise, they will be taken advantage of, there will be abuse, because commensurate with the rise in our aging population is the rise in abuse. And that is not a good sign.
With the prevalence of non-communicable diseases, there is a need for self-responsibility in getting medical checks on a timely basis. Minister in the Ministry of the People and Social Development, Vanilla Allen Toppin, underscored this as important to our future lives.
Early detection increases one's chance of survival. I know as we get older, we tend to get stubborn, but I'm encouraging all of us here today to get your yearly checkups. Those who have to take care of us later on know exactly what they have to deal with. It is projected that the subpopulation of individuals 60 and over will account for 15% of the national population in 2020. In other words, we are living older, we are living longer. In our discussions today, we must be cognizant of other concerns facing elder persons. These include family interaction, intergenerational cooperation, living arrangements, financial security, savings, pension, homelessness, abuse, and poverty.
The two-day symposium saw many areas in elderly care arise, including the discharge and readmittance at the homes. The call for the policies to be implemented regarding stipulated hours for collection of relatives at the homes, as well as the conditions for discharge, was raised.
When they take them out of the home, of course they have to bring them back at a particular time, on a particular day. So our first strategy and activity that we identified was to have an assessment done on the resident prior to them leaving the home. And this would be based on a form so that you can assess their physical condition and to some extent their psychological condition on leaving the home. So you may want to test their pressure and all these little things, and it would be reflective. That information would be reflected on the form, the various assessment forms you may have in the home.
It's expected that a report on these sessions will be submitted in the coming months. And that's how we wrap up this edition of our News 4 Report, a product of the Government Information Services Limited and the Ministry of Communications. Remember, you can see a repeat of our newscast weekdays at 6 a.m. and feel free to visit our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/RTV4. I am Kimberly Ram Kalawan. Thank you for joining us.